Describe what femininity is, what it looks like. What do you believe most men are attracted to? All right. Well, the recording is in progress. I just want to say thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Erin, for joining me. This is the first time that the three of us have ever been together because I have never met you, Sarah, until just a few minutes ago when we kind of connected before I hit the record button here on Zoom. And Erin, I've known you for a long time. This is Sarah Stonestreet and Erin Kunkel. Would you ladies introduce yourselves?
Yeah, Erin, I think you should go first, but I do have to say, Jim, it's so nice to meet you. And now I know who to blame for the Kunkles because you guys have known each other for so long. You actually married the Kunkles. So I'm like, okay, should we blame you or thank you? I don't know. That will be determined. But Erin, you go first in introducing.
You can definitely blame him for Brett because he mentored my husband when he was young. And so people try to blame me for my husband. I'm like, no. It started long before.
I have a funny feeling there's going to be some stories squeaking out here. But anyway, go ahead, Erin.
Well, I got to be on your podcast already, Jim, once with my husband, Brett. But we have been married for 25 years, married by you in Chino, California, 25 years ago. And we are parents of 5 kids, ages 27 to 10. And we're also grandparents. Our oldest daughter is married and has 2 little girls. So that's our life stage now. But when we first were married, my husband was a youth pastor, thanks to Jim and his mentoring. And so we have always, as a married couple, had a heart for the church. And so served in church ministry for many years. When my husband went back to school to get his master's degree, he started to work for a ministry called Stand to Reason, and where he started teaching more on worldview apologetics, which he was already doing in our youth group. And we had incorporated that in a lot of what we were already doing. But anyways, and then 4.5 years ago, we started the organization Maven, which is still focused on youth. Our heart is for young people, especially young people in the church. And when we started Maven, though, we also focused half of what we're doing is about students, but the other half is for those who are discipling young people. And that's parents like us and grandparents who care deeply about the discipleship of their grandkids, and teachers and Christian school teachers and homeschoolers and youth pastors and pastors who are looking around at the culture and saying, how on earth do I disciple young people in this time and place in our culture? And so that's really the heart of Maven. And then a couple years ago, my friend Sarah, who everyone's going to get to meet, approached me about doing a project with her called the Strong Women Podcast. And that's with the ministry of the Colson Center. So Sarah, I'll let you pick it up from there and introduce yourself, and then we'll talk about our podcast together.
Okay. I'm Sarah Stonestreet. I'm married to John Stonestreet, and we have 4 kids, 16. So sorry, the top 3 are girls. So we've got not 16. It's 17 now. 17, almost 15, almost 13. And then a little surprise attack, 5-year-old boy. So 3 girls and then a boy. And that has been a wild and amazing ride. And I love it so much. So dealing with the black and white discipline with the 5-year-old, and then the very wacky discipline with teenagers is shaping my soul. Should I say that? And so anyway, John and I met at Summit Ministries. Jim, have you ever heard of Summit Ministries?
I have. Yes.
Okay. We love Summit. So if I won't go too detailed in what Summit does, but we met there, and then John worked for Summit for several years and then met Chuck Colson. And and it was funny because Chuck said, "Hey, I've got 2 more years like to live. I think I have about 2 more years, and I want you to come work for me." So John did, and sure enough, like almost to the month, Chuck passed 2 years after John started working with him. And Chuck was a fantastic man who was radically changed by Christ, and it just showed through everything he did. And so anyway, John is the president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, which Chuck started, I don't know, maybe 30-something-ish years ago. And that
sounds about right.
Ish. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Probably closer to 40.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that. But, most people are familiar with the prison work that he did,
right.
after the Watergate scandal. He gave his life to Christ, went to prison, came back and really did a lot for prison reform, and also just for sharing the gospel in prison and really helping people there. And anyway, about several years into the prison ministry, he realized, Christians aren't thinking Christianly. And so we need to really get on top of that and help the church really train people to know why they believe what they believe. And so that's what the Colson Center is. It's the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. And their kind of little slogan is helping the everyday Christian live Christianly, and we have a lot of the same interests as Maven does. We're looking at this cultural moment, which is not an accident that we've all found ourselves in this time and place. It's for a reason. And so we need to understand our times and know how to act responsibly and lovingly and winsomely for the kingdom. And so that's kind of the Colson Center's vision. And of course, that trickles down to John and I and kind of what we care about and what we're invested in. So I feel like I'm just going on and on and on. But yes, so Erin and I started the Strong Women podcast together, and we can tell you more about that when you think it's appropriate. But it has been so fun to work with a good friend, and it's just strengthened our friendship. And now we have all these new mutual friends through the podcast. And so anyway, I'm thankful to be here. So thanks for having me.
Well, man, I'm just so excited about this interview with the two of you. You both use the term worldview to describe your ministry involvement. Give us a short definition from your perspective. What does that even mean, worldview?
Do you want to go in?
You were both teeing up.
Yeah. We both have the definition.
Do this a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, you can go first, Sarah, and I'll correct anything.
Okay, yeah. Get me back on track and get me out of heresy. Okay. Well, basically everyone has a worldview. Not everyone is thoughtful about their worldview. And if you aren't thoughtful about it, then you're just going to merge into the assumed ideas of culture. But a worldview is a way of looking at the world around you. It's a view of and for the world. So however you're looking at the world is also going to be how you act in the world. And so a worldview is those set of beliefs that lead you to make sense of what's around you. How'd I do, Erin?
You did good. Yeah, I mean, I was grab my reading glasses because whenever I think of worldview, I think of, Jim and I have reading glasses because our eyes are blurry, but it's, worldview is like those glasses. It's how we see everything around us. And so it's basically how we look at, just to add a illustration of what Sarah was describing, but that's a worldview. Everyone has one. A lot of times people don't think carefully about it. And as Christians, we're supposed to think carefully about it because we have to navigate this in the world, but not of the world. How do we do that? Well, part of that is figuring out what is our worldview, and then how do we live that out? How do we look at all that's around us and see it the way God wants us to see it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm speaking in a couple of weeks at my church, and the assignment I've been given is to answer the question, why do bad things happen? Why does God allow, bad things to happen? and how one thinks about that is a worldview perspective, but many don't have the advantage of Scripture integrated into their psychology in order to kind of wrestle with some of those things that appear to be almost without answer, but yet there is some good structure and form in trying to understand those things. That doesn't probably make it easier all the time at the moment, when we're going through difficult times. Jesus on the cross said, my God, why have you forsaken me? So it's a legitimate question, but similar to you ladies, what I enjoy is all of the relationships that I have with business leaders, ministry leaders, and many of them believers, but not all of them. And I enjoy relationships across the board. I'm kind of wired that way. One of the things that I like to talk about and write about, which I just mentioned, is try to encourage my friends to integrate theology with their psychology, with their strategies, with their tactics, with their visions, all of that. Thank you, Sarah, for kind of giving a little bit of background on Chuck Colson, because I was going to press you on that.
I've heard his story a number of times.
Yeah. I mean, it really is interesting, because I remember when one of his first books came out, and it had something to do with the church. I don't think I have it in my library anymore, but it was kind of on that slant. For some reason, I remember it, more like Salt and Light or something, in that neighborhood. But everyday Christians thinking and behaving Christianly, that would certainly fit, that situation. But I want to hear about this Strong Women podcast, the Strong Women podcast. Tell me about that.
Well,
it sounds kind of scary. It sounds kind of scary, to be honest.
I know, it's intimidating. Let us explain what we mean by strong.
Okay.
Well,
I feel a revolt coming on.
Yeah, we did wrestle with the title because, and Sarah and I forget how many we tossed around, because of course your name can communicate things. And actually, Sarah and I were at a conference this weekend together down in Florida this past weekend. And there was a guy, and he said, so tell me about this strong women thing. What's this about? And he was skeptical. So just to poke at him a little bit, I said, well, we're radical feminists that hate men. And so we're
okay. We're going to wrap this up.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly,
and we're done.
So I said, no, there's a reason behind the title, and it's from a Christian worldview. So Sarah's mom actually is the one who had this idea about telling stories about women, really just human stories. And so I'll let Sarah tell that part.
Yeah. So my mom grew up in the feminist movement and really bought into a lot of it, and then became a believer, and then struggled with how to view her femininity, since that was her mindset before becoming a believer. And she's very driven and very gifted. And so anyway, she came up to me let me pause that and say, all right, so she grew up in the feminist movement, and then I'm watching what's going on in the culture right now. And it was the Women's March of 2017, where I first went, I have got to figure out a way to communicate to my girls that what they're being told is a strong woman is the opposite of what's actually a strong woman. And what I mean by that is I'm watching the, little clips from the march, and here's these women who are basically sticking up their middle finger to the chauvinistic world. You patriarchs have kept us down. We're oppressed, and now we're going to show you something. And we don't need men. We actually don't need anybody. We just need ourselves. And then also another message that's also being proclaimed as strength is pursue your own happiness, no matter the casualties. Your happiness, you do the strong thing by leaving negative relationships in order for your own health. You know what I'm saying? And that's being proclaimed as strong. And after that 2017 March, I started a letter to my girls, and I never finished it, but I started it. And then I asked them, I said, and the hats that the women were wearing were like objectifying themselves. So their message doesn't make sense either. So anyway, I asked my girls, I said, this is what you're being told is strong. Pursue your own happiness. The things I just said, I repeated to them. And I said, but that's not true strength. Actually, strength is staying in hard relationships. And of course, not abusive relationships. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about relationships that go through a time where you don't feel that emotion towards that person. You don't feel love all the time. You have to choose love. And so let's think about women that we know that are choosing hard things and kind of digging deeper into life rather than just trying to satisfy their own desires or their own happiness. And so we start listing off these ladies in my church, and there's several old ladies, older, mature is what I mean, ladies in our church. And, one of my daughters said, well, Miss Lucia is who comes to mind, because Miss Lucia is, her health has gone down a lot. Like she has to come in on a wheelchair now because she had a stroke. But she's there every Sunday, and she's there for every church event, and she's always joyful, even though we know she lives a hard life. And of course, they didn't articulate it quite that smoothly, but that's the gist of what they were saying. And so then, okay, so that's going on in my head. My mom is trying to wrestle through this feminist thing. And she comes to me and she says, we should write a book about all the strong women who have influenced us during our life. And I said, ooh, I like that. And what if we made it a podcast? Because we're going to record the conversation anyway. And she goes, oh, I love that. And so we started brainstorming. And then she goes, actually, I don't have time for a podcast or a book, but I love the idea and I want you to go for it. And so I had already actually thought of Erin, because I was like, we're on the same page so much that, we're definitely different. And, I'm helping lead and, mentor Erin. I'm just kidding. She has been a mentor to me and a strong woman in my life. And so I immediately thought of her. And so we were on a trip to Israel. It was a fun trip and it was amazing. And I said, hey, this is my idea. You have daughters. I think you're a strong woman. Could you join me on this? And she almost immediately, I think she took a few seconds because she's a crockpot thinker, but she almost immediately said, I am so in. And so then Erin, tell them what we do, how we're going about this.
Yeah. Well, so I love the idea of telling stories of different women who are demonstrating strength. And we really just were going to record these for our daughters, if for nothing else. And because, like Sarah said, what the culture is saying about women was not what the message we wanted our girls to hear. And we also know that it's not super effective to sit your kids down and preach at them and say, hey, this is what a real woman is. And this, I don't want you to believe this stuff, but what a beautiful way to teach about truth through stories and real stories of real women. And actually part of the podcast, we do history episodes too. So we tell stories of women in the past as well. Because as Christians, we have this wealth of family history that is full of amazing Christians who have lived in difficult times, although they aren't the same as ours. Some have lived in much more difficult times than us. And so telling these stories paints a beautiful picture of humanity, of what it means to be made in God's image as a woman. But it doesn't come with all the preaching and the lecturing as much as here's an example of someone. What can you catch just from hearing their story? And so that's what we do on the podcast. Now, the funny thing is, it is called the Strong Women Podcast. And of course, the majority of our listeners are women, but we have heard over and over again, including this weekend at the conference we were at, men who come up to us and say, I love your podcast. I listen to every episode. I
Wow.
heard your
Wow.
podcast and I told my wife about it. I told my mom about it. I listened. There was one guy that told us, do you remember, Sarah, that he listens with his older daughters
Mhm.
and then they talk about the episodes together. So that's a good sign that we're not bashing on men, as I joked about before, but actually looking at the beauty of God's design for women. It just naturally leads a lot of time to this conversation of the natural beauty of God's design for men as well. And so it's just been a really fun project. And I love the idea mostly because it's an answer to what the culture's saying without being negative about it. Like Sarah said, we're not the women that are screaming and angry. We're doing, what C.S. Lewis talked about. An answer to bad culture for a Christian can be creating good culture. And that's what Sarah and I are wanting to do. We're wanting to create beautiful culture for people to be drawn to, and that communicates truth and goodness and beauty by doing that. So that's really the heart behind the project.
Well, ladies, thank you. That was a great introduction to your podcast. I had some questions and some thoughts I want to run by you. But first to you, Sarah, it sounds like you actually got to see some of this transformation in your mom's life. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, she became a believer about 2 years before she got pregnant with me. And so I've definitely seen that transformation. Of course, I didn't realize it. It's more like in hindsight, because as a kid, you're just kind of walking along. But yeah, I think my mom works out her femininity and her, being made in the image of God as a woman in a really beautiful way. And she and my dad have the best marriage I've ever seen. And I've experienced it firsthand. And but she's always been the one that brings in the salary, because she, like, the bigger salary. I mean, my dad's worked, but he's been a teacher at a Christian school, so he could be close to me, and they sacrificed in that way. And my mom was a nurse practitioner in oncology, but she does it in a feminine way, and it's hard to define. But she's retired now, but just her care for patients, but also having that professionalism. I don't know. She just, I'm in awe of how she did life.
Okay, here's a question coming from an obvious dude. So I was about to make the mistake of taking a stab at it, so I think I'm going to back away from it and give it to the two of you. Describe what femininity is and what it looks like. What do you believe most men are attracted to? And just get into that ring with me there.
Oh boy.
Well, I know. Well, I mean, it depends how sometimes femininity is used in basically how women display themselves and interact in the culture that they're in. So sometimes, depending on how you're defining it, femininity can look different in different cultures, right? In Jesus's time in first century Israel, femininity, or being a woman, you would have presented yourself, your roles would be quite different. All of that would look different than in year 2022 in America. Being a woman and expressing my quote femininity will look quite different. But when you talk about something like something that we think, and this is what we try to do on the podcast, is to look deeper at God's design for women and less about like roles and what maybe culturally it's going to work itself out as. And that's why it's fun to do the history ones too, because you get to look back at how these women lived in their cultures. But when you look at, well, first you have to look at, like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? And then that more specific question, what does it mean to be made of in the image of God as women? And so what it means to be made in the image of God as women is that we demonstrate things about God that is unique to women, and men do this also. But Genesis talks about that God displays his image in both men and women. So both are actually needed to get a full image, as full as we can, of God on earth, right? And so to me, when I think about it, and as I've studied and read, and as Sarah and I have done the podcast, there's certainly characteristics that we find that are quite similar in all these women's stories. The women we highlight are women that desire to learn and grow in their knowledge of God. Now that's unique. That's not unique to women. Of course, that's men and women who have a desire to know and be like Christ. But women in particular, like I'll talk about one in particular. So one thing that's unique to women, I think one way that we uniquely display God's image is that we nurture life. And nurturing life, although it includes caring, bearing children, not all women do that. And not all women have to do that to bear God's image. And of course, it's going to look different. But this theme of nurturing life, like Sarah talked about, her mom was a nurse. And I mean, you could say it's a coincidence, and that's fine. But over 90% of nurses are women. Why is that? Now, one of our best
Hey, your microphone just went off.
Oh, no. Did it go back?
Yep.
Sounds good.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about
no,
that.
You're good.
You just said 90% of women are nurses. 90% of nurses are women.
Yeah, are women.
So 90% of nurses are women. Now, one of our best friends is a man, and he is a nurse. So I know there are exceptions to this rule, and there's always exceptions. That's okay. We have to talk in generalities.
Yeah, like Glenn Stanton, we had him on, and he said women tend to and men tend to. We have to talk in these generalities because there's always the exceptions.
Sure.
Yeah, you can't talk in totalities because not every woman is going to fit in this. But this idea of nurturing life, and so like 90% of nurses are women. Over 90% of construction workers are men. Well, why is that? I think it speaks to our natures. In general, men are builders, and that's going to look different in the culture and time and place and things that men do. They're not all going to be builders with their hands, but anyway, so this idea of being nurturers of life will look different in every woman's life, but in general, we are nurturers of life. And I think that is one of the most beautiful ways we image God to the world around us. Sarah, I don't know if you want to add.
Well, before we go on, I just really appreciate what you said in the idea that, to get a fuller picture of the image of God from the human perspective, we get that, let's just go with your words, a builder, a nurturer, a man, a woman. In general, you go, there's probably some purpose in that, in the Creator's design. And as Christians, we care for people, we love people, but deception is sometimes slow yet determined to destroy. Why? Of course, that's a whole nother mystery. It's a whole nother mystery in that. But I wanted to back up a little bit because you got me fired up. Both of you got me fired up about strong women, and you started making me think about my own family. And, I know things about my mom, and, she is an amazing woman. I know her story. I know what she's been through as a child, as a young woman, how her and my father, built a home from nothing in the midst of difficulties. Raising us 4 kids wasn't, wasn't easy, and has its own story. And the woman that she is today, I would call my mom stubbornly, consistently loving. She's just, she knows her purpose. And my wife, very few people know what my wife has been through in her life. And she, is my sister. I tell her all the time, my sister is one of my heroes and what she has endured. But I think that, Sarah, you said it, earlier on, that, what we're starting to live in a culture where if we run up against difficult things, that means to change the channel. And maybe occasionally it does, but usually it doesn't. Usually it does not. And then I think, frankly, about my 2 daughters, one by marriage and my daughter. And it's, love and pain in my dictionary are synonymous. I can't separate the two. As a selfish human being, if I wouldn't have known the pain that comes with love, I don't know that I would have had the courage, to keep going. And so I really couldn't go on with this podcast without just, thinking about the women in my life and how strong they are, all godly, all, different. But I want to say one other thing and then turn it back to Sarah. I guess what I was getting at when I was scared to, dip my toe in the water about, attractive femininity, I use the word attractive. I like the word attractive. When I use the word attractive, I don't necessarily mean from a sexual, perspective. Certainly, that can be involved, in that. But it's that, I think of words like aroma, words about, kindness, hospitality, and I see what corporate America can do to women if they allow it, to happen. And I can see, there still really is a thing. From my perspective, there still really is a thing in the corporate world. There are some who believe in one extreme that women don't belong there, and those people are still around, and they're not just men, they're women. And then for those that are there, the thing that I hear almost all the time is that they feel like they have to work twice as hard or 3 times as hard, to earn the same thing or get the same shot at things. And some men would look at that and say, it's true. It's true. And some would say it's not true, right? But one of the things I have noticed is that some women have determined in their mind and determined in their behaviors that they would not let the existential things in life that they are fighting against change them from the inside out. And they still have that attractive, nurturing, and still very professional, whatever it is that they need to do. It's not like they can't make hard decisions. Moms make hard decisions every day. In fact, a lot of men don't make those decisions, because they go to work and run from them, and that's, I've always heard that, and I shared this with a lot of the folks that I get to work with, is that in a lot of ways, going to work is easier. Leading at work is easier than leading at home. And those are some of the things that you have kind of triggered in me so far. But we're talking about strong women, and I think, Erin, you're handing the baton over to Sarah for some comments.
Yeah. Okay. I love what you said, Erin. This is why we like working together, because I like what she says. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk about the women in your life. And we really were built for kingdom friendship. I mean, you think about, well, one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast was out of curiosity, because all the definitions of femininity felt so small that I had heard. And I thought it's got to be bigger than that, And so this idea of starting with design, I mean, we were given this amazing task that is too big for men or women to do by themselves. We're created for kingdom friendship. And you think about the 4 chapters of the big story, creation. God creates everything. And then he says, you as man and woman, I want you to keep going with this creation. You take what I've made, do your thing with it. I've gifted you to do more. And then, of course, the fall severs that relationship in such a terrible way, but it's not the end. God doesn't say, oh, well, look at my creation. He continues to come down and interact with his people, come down to Abraham and says, you're going to be a blessing. He comes down to Moses and says, I'm going to rescue this people. And then, he continues to interact with his people, which is unlike any other God offered in any other worldview. And then redemption, and Christ comes as man and gives us the restored relationship. And then, 2 Corinthians 5 says, we have been reconciled. And so now we are reconcilers. So we're given that job in creation to say, here's this beautiful, bountiful creation. I've gifted you to do more with it. And then we have that job on top of being reconcilers. And God says, now I've begun this work. Your job is to keep going with it. And so we have this amazing job. And so I think the question we have to ask is, I mean, that's a huge task. So then we got to go to where we are placed in this time, this place, this city, this church, this home, these relationships. And we have to say, what am I gifted to do to talk to these 2 jobs? I cannot do this on my own. Not only am I reliant on the men in my life, but I'm reliant on the women in my life and reliant on the church as a whole to accomplish these things, these huge tasks that God has given us. So I like to say that a strong woman is someone who sees the world, develops eyes to see the world around her and to love it with all its beauty and brokenness as Christ loves it, with the gifts she's been given in her sphere of influence. And you talked earlier about talking with your leader friends about bringing their theology into what they're doing. And I think that's it. The developing eyes to see, that is being grounded in the church and in scripture and having your theology robust. And when you find out it's too small, you dig in deeper and learn more. And so anyway, that's kind of how I would describe that.
So what do you ladies make of
You looked holy, by the way, with that light coming in.
Yeah. I got up and kind of closed the blinds because I saw the, what is that called? Sun rays? Is that what they are? Yeah, sun rays.
Like Pastor Jim.
Yeah, that was bugging me. So I moved that. So, help me out here as a grandpa. Erin, you told everyone you're a grandma. So, boy, this whole sexual, this gender confusion, is it confusion? What is going on from your perspective? What is our play here? How do we respond?
Well, oh man, we could probably say a lot about that. I think in some ways, there's nothing new under the sun. So the attack on who we are as people, which fundamentally this like this transgender conversation that the culture's having is fundamentally under that, is like, what does it mean to be human? And is there such a thing as being a woman and a man? And actually, what I've noticed more, and Sarah and I didn't start the podcast knowing the future, but here the culture is asking, just even in testimony in the Senate yesterday, what is a woman? And so that is a fundamental question about what it is as a human being to be a woman. Now, I'm not hearing many people say, what does it mean to be a man? So it is quite interesting that with all of this transgender stuff, it does seem like the focus is particularly on women. And I would say particularly the attack is on women and what it means to be a woman. And so all these things that only women can do, such as giving birth, such as breastfeeding, now these titles are being changed to birthing people, chest feeding people. And so I do see it as an attack on who we are as humans, but particularly an attack on women and how we are unique in what we offer as image bearers to God. But I do think, so in some ways, is the culture battle different than what we've seen before? Well, in some ways, yeah. I mean, I don't know of a time in history where more than 70% of, right now in our culture, more than 70% of transgender surgeries are performed on women. 70%. So that's,
Erin, is this attack on women? I've never thought of it that way till you obviously brought in the metrics. That makes a lot of sense. Do you think that this attack is a conscious thing that is going on? Is there a head to the spider, or is this something? Is this something different? Is this an Ephesians 6, thing going on? What do you ladies think?
Well, I think it's a both and. I do think it's goes back to the beginning of humanity and the battle of the sexes. Sarah said we were made for kingdom friendship. Men and women were made to work together in friendship to image God. But since the fall, that has been hard to do. And there has been the battle of the sexes that since that time. But like you mentioned, Jim, in business, women will talk about the struggle of feeling like they have to work harder than men and that sort of thing. And you do hear that. And I think, well, there probably is something to that, because I do think a lot of times in culture, the standard of what, is to be accomplished is set by men. And so like with this transgender conversation, just take the issue of sports. So they're allowing biological men to compete with women now. Well, we all know basic biology, so we understand that men have all the advantage when it comes to physical competition. They have more muscle mass, they have more testosterone, their heart and lungs are bigger. I mean, we could go on and on. Their wingspan. So talk about swimming. Men have an advantage in every way. And so the standard is men until they made women's sports. Then women were able to compete with each other. Now, when my mom was in high school, there wasn't women's sports, there was cheerleading. And that's what was offered to women. So I grew up with a mom who reminded me all the time how fortunate I was that I got to play volleyball and basketball and softball and all these sports. But now, how quickly things are changing to where biological men are winning awards in all kinds of women's sports. And so now again, we're asking, is there such thing as a man and a woman? And if so, does it matter? And if it doesn't matter, then why do we even have men and women swimming? Why don't we just have swimming? Everybody go out and compete. Well, we all know who will win. If that's what happens, it'll be men. So I don't think there's like a conspiracy of men saying, let's bring down women. I believe scripture when they say our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the evil spirits that rule. And so in that way, I think it's a both and. Some of these battles have been from the garden, and that's where it all started. Of course, in our unique cultural times, we'll have different things in the battle that kind of rear its ugly head. But Sarah, I'll let you answer too, or Jim, you want to say?
Yeah, it's hard for me. I don't disbelieve what you're saying, but it's just difficult for me to even think about going through a sex change so that I can compete against girls. And I know that that statement can make a lot of people angry. It's still my view, my feeling, my opinion. And for, I mean, there are some things that just seem so obvious. It's weird that we even have to talk about it. And to say it this way, as a man, I'm kind of embarrassed that that would even be considered as an option. I don't even understand how it happened, and how it's happening. I don't understand. I don't understand it. And this is what I mean. Yeah, it might be true that there's nothing new under the sun. Well, there are certainly higher heights or deeper depths of things. Mold grows, mildew grows. I just feel bad for everybody. I feel bad for everybody in this thing. Sarah?
Yeah. Well, I got a book for you. Erin and I just finished Carl Trueman's book. He has two. He has Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, and that's a little more academic. And then Ryan Anderson came to him and said, could you write this book in a way that I can hand it out to all my staff? And so he wrote a smaller book that's still wonderfully academic, just more readable, called A Strange New World. And in it, he tracks your question. He says, how did we get here? Like, this seems, why is this even a conversation? It seems so illogical. And he goes back and he starts with some of the philosophers like Sartre and Rousseau. And Rousseau was kind of the first one to say that without a higher being, our highest authority is inside. We need to look inside. That is our highest authority. What we look inside and see, that we need to express that. And he had optimistic ideas, which is funny because he gave all his children away to orphanages, but he had optimistic ideas that if we looked inside, we'd actually find sympathy and compassion. And then Carl Trueman, the author of this book I'm telling you about, he goes through several other philosophers, really. And then, of course, I have to talk about Freud, because Freud took Rousseau's idea. Yeah, we need to look inside ourselves. But actually, when we look inside ourselves, it's quite dark, or quite dark, as Carl Trueman says, because he's British. It's quite dark. And in fact, it's largely sexual. And so, but I still agree with Rousseau that we still need to express those feelings. And so you get that. And then you get the artifacts of the cultural artifacts of birth control, and that separated sex and marriage. Not that I'm not giving a statement about my opinion about birth control. I'm just saying it is an artifact that made it possible to separate sex from babies and sex from marriage, and all those different pieces. So anyway, he tracks all that to show that it did not just happen yesterday. And he also talks about no-fault divorce, which really shifted the mindset that marriage and love was about feeling and happiness rather than commitment. Then he also shows how the three institutions, talking about our day now, the three institutions that have historically been those identity grounders and formers, the state, the family, and the church. Well, look at our cultural moment. Those are the three things that are kind of being swept aside as irrelevant, even harmful. And And so he says, where are we going to find our identity? And that is where this strong pull, and then of course the internet allows you to find any kind of tribal identity that you want. And he talks about this draw into joining in with ISIS, from American young people joining up with an ISIS ideology, but they're in America. They have more connection with this online community all the way across the world than they're finding in their own families. So, but that all sounds sad, and it is sad, but it's also a very hopeful time, because reality is still reality and truth is still truth. You can't change gravity. If you jump off a second story building, you're still going to fall. And that's the same with the natural order. The way God has created things hasn't changed just because we want it to change. And so I say it's a hopeful, exciting time, because we have life-giving truth that we can offer our neighbors. And that's why it's so important, going back to this grounding ourselves in good theology, because we need to know why we believe what we believe, because it's important for the two greatest commandments. If we know why we believe what we believe, we're falling in love with God more, which is the first commandment. And then we're able to love our neighbors who have been captured by false ideas and ideas that tell them that they aren't who they really are.
Mhm.
And so I get excited about, what does this look like in the three of us? What does this look like in our spheres of influence? And then what does it look like for our kids and grandkids? Because they're going to have a wonderful opportunity to live in the fullness of who they are as made in the image of God, that is going to look so starkly different to their neighbor, to how their neighbors are understanding their identity, that they're going to attract people. Speaking of that attractiveness, people are going to look at them and go, what is different? How are they grounded? How are they confident in who they are? So that's what makes me excited about it's kind of a weird excitement, but are you tracking with me on why?
No, I am tracking with you. For me, it goes back to the blocking and tackling. It kind of brings back some memories of when I focused on some of the basics and trying to get young people to think. It really and make decisions ahead of time and things like that. It really seemed to help them. Now, Sarah, you're going to have to give us the name, the author again, and the name of the book.
Okay, the name of the book is A Strange New World.
A Strange New World.
And the author is Dr. Carl with a C, Carl Trueman, and that's True Man, like spelled with an E there. True Man.
Carl Trueman. That was your latest episode, I think, right?
It was.
You're interviewing him, right? I listened to a little bit of that just in preparation for today. Well, that right there is, I know for me, we have sayings, right? Get your head on straight. And it sounds like, that just answering the question, how did we get here, helps us get our head on straight. It helps us prepare in a way that will make us useful, right? Useful.
Right. Which I think, Jim, I'll just say, if leaders and pastors listen to your podcast, Carl at the end of our interview said, pastors need this so much. Well, why do pastors need? Because pastors and leaders in the business, you are the leaders. People are listening to you. And I can tell you, if you have employees or you are a pastor of a church, people are desperate for truth. Human beings always have a desire for truth. We are truth seekers. But now with the confusion that they are getting in the culture, they need us as leaders to speak truth more than ever and to understand our times and to have a Christian worldview about it, to put it in the context of what people are living in, and then to give them, as a leader, to say, this is the truth. I'm going to stand on the truth, and you can follow me in that. Let's do this together. That people need that so desperately. And that's why I love what you're doing, Jim, because we always need leaders. There will always be leaders. And right now, a lot of the leaders in the culture are basically just saying lies, and they're deceiving, especially young people. And it's heartbreaking. And so a leader in a business, a leader in a church needs to know firmly truth. And so if you don't know it, you need to know it. And then you need to stand on it. And gosh, people need leaders so desperately to say true things. You cannot be a man trapped in a woman's body. It's not actually possible. You are a woman. God's design is beautiful. Now, if you are struggling with what that means, well, then as a pastor or a leader, I will walk through you with that. Maybe you're stuck on some of the stereotypes. If you think to be a woman, you have to like pink, and you can't like economics or whatever it is. Okay, well, that's just a silly stereotype. No, that doesn't say anything about you. You're still a woman. This is the kind of basic truth that people are desperate for today. And so reading books like Carl's book for Sarah and I was so helpful, because it helps us to understand, the world so much better. Studying scripture is so necessary as we try to live for Christ in this culture and be leaders. Even like Sarah said, we all have different spheres. So leadership is going to look different for all of us. Maybe the leadership you have is just in your home and in your community, or maybe you're running a big business, or you're in a small church in a little town, or maybe you're in a big church. But wherever it is, I can tell you the culture is desperate for the truth, and people need it so much now. So the more we can equip ourselves as leaders to understand, like Sarah just talked about, there's such a good synopsis of Carl's book. The more we can understand that, the better we can help and lead the people around us.
Mm-hmm.
Ladies, can I ask you, can we do this again in the near future?
Yes.
Yeah, because I have got so many questions that I've written down that we have run out of time and really need to come back to. So thank you for being willing to do that. Thank you for the time that you've given today. For our listeners, correct me if I'm wrong, the name of the podcast is The Strong Women plural, The Strong Women Podcast. I just Googled it and it popped right up. So I think that's all I really need to do wherever they find their podcasts. Or if you're not a podcast listener, but you're somehow listening to this because you saw Strong Women, I think that's what we're going to name this podcast, Strong Women. I was wondering what we're going to do, but it seems pretty clear what we should name it. Bless you, ladies. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy lives, your ministry, your family, to spend an evening with me, and I will circle back.
Thanks,
This has
Jim.
been great, Jim. I can't wait to do it again.
Is there anything else, any other area that you want people to know about, or where they can get in touch with you?
Maven?
Sarah? Oh, well, why don't you say, you want to
I could say the Facebook,
page
sure. And then you should talk about Maven. Okay. Sure. They can find us on Facebook too. And we have a really lively community on Facebook, which has been a surprise for Erin and I. We weren't expecting that, but it's been great. So that is the Strong Women Podcast community. And then you can also find us on Instagram at Strong Women CC.
Beautiful. Erin?
What else, Erin?
Well, you can find me and my husband's ministry, maventruth.com, at our website. And then, my husband and I also do a parent podcast, and that's on all podcasts apps as well. So if you have the Apple Podcast app, whatever, you can look up Strong Women or Maven Parent Podcast, and it'll come right up. So.
And your husband's co-authored a book together. I think it's called The Practical Guide to Culture, or did I mess that up?
Yes. No, that's right.
Yeah.
And Erin's daughter said we should write one called A Women's Practical Guide to Culture, but we're not doing that. But I
But
thought
then
that was
Sarah,
so funny.
Sarah, what did you say
Oh,
when
yeah.
my daughter Ella said that? Sarah said, no,
That
we should
I-
write this book.
Yeah, I responded and said, what our husbands didn't tell you about culture. Yeah.
Yeah. Correction. Yeah.
Yeah.
The corrected version.
Yeah.
Or the revised version.
The
something like
revised
that.
Exactly.
version.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I should mention the Colson Center, because the Colson Center is the one who puts on our podcast. And I mean, I'm just such a huge fan. I mean, obviously I'm married to John, who runs the Colson Center, but I use all their resources. There's a plethora of resources. You can do a 5-minute a day thing all the way down to a 10-month intensive on worldview and culture and things like that. So go check out the Colson Center as well. And that's colsoncenter.org.